Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the LaunchPad Associate Workshops. The LaunchPad Associate Workshops is an 8-week long interactive classroom-type setting going through the 8 levels of the Level 1 PGM program. Tonight we have Dave Podas, Director of Golf at Bel Air Country Club in Los Angeles. For those of you that don't know Dave, he is the aforementioned expert on rules. If you ask any PGA member in the Southern California section who their top 3 most knowledgeable rules aficionados are, Dave Podas usually is in the top 2. Certainly the biggest rules expert that I know, and he's been gracious enough to come on various webinars and spoke at various workshops over the years to help educate the section and chapter on rules of golf and rules in golf interpretation. And the background on Dave's been the director of golf at Bel Air, I think, for 16 or 17 years. And prior to that, he was the director of golf at Minneapolis Country Club in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Correct, Dave?
Correct. 21 years at Bel Air and about 10 or 11 in Minneapolis.
Excellent. And obviously, a man who needs no introduction. We're just grateful for his time and effort and being able to come on and present on the LaunchPad tonight on rules of golf. Without any further ado, it's all yours, Dave. And like we spoke about before on the LaunchPad, we want to make the session as interactive as possible. For those of you that are on this evening's call, feel free to raise your hand or interject with a question. Dave can extrapolate and go as deep as you want. And like I said, the foremost well-respected rules expert in the Southern California section, Dave Podas.
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be here. John, thank you very much for those kind words. The rules of golf, very dry. Some think it's boring, but I'll tell you what, I think it's very, very important. It's difficult, it's challenging, but for those that take the time to dive in and get better at the rules, it is such a very important part of our career in what we do. I know years ago when I was on the front end of my PGA rules learning curve, I played a lot of golf. I thought I knew the rules pretty well. I was working for a professional in Phoenix, Arizona as an assistant. And I was fascinated by how this fellow's name was Ralph Bernheisel. He was the director of golf at Phoenix Country Club. How when somebody came into the golf shop with a rules question, how he could recite rule, verse, page, chapter, line. I was really impressed by that. And I thought to myself, someday I want to be that guy. I want to be the guy that they call, that they go to for rules questions. And I dove in with both feet, and I found out in short order that I wasn't very good. It's amazing how you can play the game virtually every day and play it reasonably well, if you will. You think you know the rules, but you don't. I signed up for my very first USGA PGA rules workshop, took the 4-day rules course, took the test at the end, and about a month later when I got my results, I was in tears at my lack of knowledge, thinking I knew something, but I really didn't. So I didn't give up, kept going, and I solicited the help of a couple of guys, Ralph Bernheisel, Larry Startzel, who helped me along this journey. And just a touch of housekeeping before we move on. As John said, this needs to be interactive because I can't possibly talk for 45 straight minutes. So questions are welcome, but what we always try to do in our rules seminars and workshops is see if we can't, as best we can, keep the questions kind of on topic and keep them rule specific, and for this evening's purposes, keep them about trying to learn the rules. What we try to shy away from that generally isn't very good for the group as a whole is when we start to get questions like, Dave, 2 weeks ago in our member guest, Joe was in the bunker on number 2 and his opponent kicked his ball and they came in the shop and one of my assistants told them about this and so on and so forth. And questions like that usually aren't very helpful for the entire group, but please ask a lot of questions. We'll have some fun and we're going to dive right in. All right, Steve, next slide if we can. Now, why is being a rules expert important or being good at the rules? Well, first of all, being knowledgeable with the rules of golf lends itself to credibility. I think when people think of us as PGA professionals, one of the things they really think about is somebody that understands the rules of the game. I've always thought, and it's just my opinion, that when you introduce yourself as a PGA professional, they think of 3 things really. They think about playing the game, they think about teaching the game, and they think about administering the game. And I think under that umbrella of administering the game comes with this idea that PGA professionals are pretty knowledgeable about the rules. And as I mentioned earlier about being in a golf shop and listening to my mentor, my boss, go through the rules of golf, it was impressive. And those of us in the business, as most of us are today or aspire to be, it's pretty hard, ladies and gentlemen, to stand in a golf shop for any length of time. In fact, at my club, not a day doesn't go by where somebody doesn't come into the shop and ask a rules question. That's just part of what we do every single day. So the better we are, the better we look, and the more important we become to the game of golf. So that's why I think for any of you, especially these our young apprentices and those taking up this great career, becoming proficient at the rules of golf, there's no downside. It's only upside. And fact of the matter is, once you get along that journey, it opens up some pretty good doors and allows those that are good at the rules to do some pretty neat things. So I really encourage everybody to take the time and get as good as you can with the rules of golf. Steve, next slide. Now, just a couple, some history and some thoughts. The first printed and recorded version of the rules of golf was in 1744 by the Honorable Company of Edinburgh Golfers. There were 13 rules written when they first decided to pencil this game out on paper. And really, those 13 rules are intertwined in the 25 that we have today, and they really haven't changed that much. It's still very much the same game that they were playing hundreds of years ago. And one of the things I'd like to suggest to all of you that have a real interest in getting better at the rules of golf is that there's a small book that was published in 1960 by a president of the USGA. The gentleman's name was Richard Tufts, Tufts. And it was called The Principles Behind the Rules of Golf. And what this little dry, boring, and difficult read is about, it's about understanding the theory and the whys behind the rules. And that's a very important thing because so many people, myself included, especially on the front end, as we were learning about the rules of golf, we learned by memorization. And we got good by reading and reading and rereading and memorizing the rules. And that certainly is one way to go about it. And it's very important. But what Richard Tufts talks about in this book that I encourage those of you that have a genuine interest in this to get your hands on, it's not very expensive, it's a very small book available in paperback, is it allows people to bridge the gap between memorizing the rules and actually understanding the principles, the hows and the whys. And once you get over onto that side of the street, understanding the theory and the reason that the rules are written the way they are, you're way, way ahead of the few that just take out the book like I did on the front end and memorize. But that real understanding. And one of the things he talks about, that helps us begin our journey in learning the rules is there are two founding principles that are intertwined through almost every rule. And if you didn't know anything about the rules and you had a question and you fell back on these two statements that are up on the screen, you wouldn't be very far off. The first one is play the ball as it lies. Second one, play the course as you find it. Almost every rule in the book has its origins in one of those two principles. And as we move forward, the reason we have the 25 rules is it deals with either our ability or our inability to manage these two principles. As example, we all, I think, can envision the 18th hole at Pebble Beach, par 5, slight dog leg left, beautiful Pacific Ocean on the left. Player stands up, they hook their ball out into the Pacific. Now, unless they've got scuba gear with them, they no longer can adhere to that first principle, play the ball as it lies. So now we need a rule, Rule 17, about penalty areas to allow that golfer to continue. So it's just a small example of how understanding and managing these two core principles allows us to get a little bit better and really digest the rules of golf and help our learning curve along the way. Steve, next one. All right, so let's talk about the best and the most practical way to learn the rules of golf. One of the things that we know through experience that almost never works. If it works for you, you would be one of the few. You cannot pick up this rules of golf, crawl into bed, open it up at page 1, and dive in and start reading the rules. You'll be asleep by the time you get to about the 4th page. That absolutely, positively will not work, we have found. But there are ways to get started and manage these rules. It's not impossible. And kind of what we found to get better is the first thing you have to do is learn the definitions. There's about 20 pages of definitions at the back of the book. There's roughly 70 definitions. So we want to get better. We want to learn the rules of golf. The very first thing we have to understand is the language of our game, these definitions. So we read the definitions. Let's just say as a timeline, you set aside 4 days. With these 20 pages, it will take you 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the afternoon, and you read these definitions twice a day for 4 days. You already are 75. Once you complete that, you are 75% better than virtually anybody in America in their understanding of the rules of golf. Once you manage these definitions and learn those. And one of the things that I do that was suggested to me, once you read something a couple of times, your eyes tend to move ahead and skip forward. I read them front to back from abnormal course conditions to wrong green. And then the next time I read them from back to front, starting with wrong green and moving up to abnormal course conditions. So your eyes can't skip ahead. And you would be surprised once you understand those definitions, what a great head start you have. And then what I put up on the screen that we really don't have to go over line by line. The rules in the book are kind of lumped together. And what I've put up here is just some suggestions that when you read the rules, let's say we were going to sit down and spend an hour, you might read rules 5, 6, and 7. They are related. You read those rules. Rule 14, probably the toughest and the longest rule in the book. That one you got to tackle alone. Same with Rule 18. You got to tackle that one alone. Steve, next slide. And again, what I like to do is put these rules in blocks. And Rule 4 is as an example, the equipment rule. That's kind of a standalone rule. So you read that one all by itself. 15 and 16. And then next slide, rules 22 and 23, other forms of play, we put those together. So that's really, it's how we teach the rules in the USGA Rules of Golf workshops, but it's also a good way to learn the rules. So you don't go cover to cover. You take these rules in small chunks or blocks. And what I suggest you do, you get to Rule 18, let's say, and you read Rule 18, and then you open up the official guide, the big book, as we say, the book with the clarifications. And at that point, you read all the clarifications about that rule. So you read a rule, and then you read the clarifications, and you tackle these things in groups together. One of the other great tools that's a big help is these rules of golf quizzes found on the USGA website. Those are spectacular as it relates to getting better and learning the rules. And it also, quite frankly, it gives you instant feedback. It tells you how you do right away, but it kind of tells you where you stand. And I know myself, just as somebody that has to prepare every year or so to make a qualifying score on this USGA test, I take those questions every day, take them over and over and over again. And it really, really helps because they've got hundreds and hundreds of questions, and it's a great, great way to get better at the rules of golf and kind of see the things you know and maybe a rule or two that you need to go back and revisit. There's another great website that I didn't put up on this PowerPoint that has wonderful questions as well. It's called the Roving Official. The Roving Official. And what you can do on that particular website is you can go on and it will have anywhere from 10 to 75 questions on each individual rule. So if you read the official guide, you read a rule, you read the official guide, and then you went on to the Roving Official site and answered every question they had on Rule 18, you would be amazed at how quickly and how much better you would be in learning the rules of golf. Next one, Steve. Now, as we talk about the rules of golf, I always like to think, this is just my own opinion, that there are a couple of concepts here that are intertwined through the entire book that people really need to be able to wrap their arms around. First of all is this concept of knowledge or virtual certainty. And what this is it's the standard for deciding what's happened to a player's ball. For example, if we hit our ball into a penalty area, a red penalty area, in order to operate under the penalty area rule, we need what's called knowledge or virtual certainty. And that just doesn't mean we're pretty sure it's in the penalty area, it's in the water. It means we need 95% certainty that ball's in the water. Same standard is used if we deal with a ball that may or may not have been moved. Did that ball move? Well, we have 95% certainty that it moved, then it moved. Absent that, we are going to treat the ball as if it didn't move. So I would encourage all of you, again, it's in the definition section, to really spend some time and wrap your arms around this concept of knowledge or virtual certainty, because we deal with it almost every day when we're dealing with the rule situation. Well, what happened? Where'd the ball go? Well, I think it's in that tree. What do you mean you think it's in that tree? Can you see it? Are you certain? Can you take your rangefinder out and see your identifying mark on the side of that Titleist? Did we cross that 95% certainty threshold? Very, very important. The next concept that is used throughout the book that again, I encourage everybody to become very, very familiar with is this nearest point of complete relief. And this is the reference point for taking free relief from an abnormal ground condition. Now, what's that? It's temporary water. It's ground under repair. I promise you, at my club, and I know my club at Bel Air, we are no different than every other club across the country. When rules questions come in and they deal with relief, almost nobody has a good idea and is completely comfortable with this idea of what is the nearest point of complete relief. You know, people take a ball on a cart path and they split the cart path in half and say, well, my ball's on the right side of the cart path, I must go to the right, or my ball's on the left side of the cart path, so I'm going to the left. Not necessarily true. So you want to get good at the rules, you want to score high on rules exams, become completely familiar, become an expert on this idea of nearest point of complete relief. Now, the other thing I think is always worth talking about just a bit is this idea that people have trouble wrapping their arms around, and it's the idea that the rules trust the player. The rules are written from the perspective that the players know the rules and they're trying to play by the rules. The rules were never written, if you will, to catch someone that's cheating or somebody that's dishonest. The rules believe the player. In fact, we have instances after instances where you have a rule situation come up and we ask the player, did you do this or didn't you? If the player says, I didn't do it, I didn't touch my ball, unless there's some overwhelming bit of evidence where there's a dozen people that saw the player do something, we believe the player. So remember, when we're making rulings and we're dealing with the rules, unlike so many other sports, the rules trust the player. And if you keep that in the back of your mind, I know I do, and I remind myself when I go into a rule situation, if I ask a player a question, say, what were you doing? And they give me an answer. Where did your ball cross? I believe it crossed right here. The rules trust the player. So very, very important concept for all of us to understand as we work through the rules and administer the rules. Steve, next slide. Now, let's talk about tips for making a correct ruling. We always say in our rules business, it's a little bit like being an airline pilot. It's 95% boredom and 5% sheer panic. That's what managing rule situations are. Mostly boredom, but when you get called in, oftentimes there's a lot of panic involved. So one of the things I always like to remind people, stay calm and listen. Stay calm and listen. Before you want to tell everybody how much you know about the rules, stay calm and listen to the players, listen to the caddies. And one of the things we always talk about is ask the right questions. As an example, when the golfers come into my shop with a rules problem, a rules question, the very first thing I ask them is, what form of play were you playing? And they always say, Pro, we're playing golf. What do you think we're doing? We're playing golf. I say, no, tell me, how were you keeping score? Were you keeping score by holes, or were you keeping score by who shot the lowest score at the end? And inevitably, at the club level, they play match play about 98% of the time. So yeah, Pro, we're playing, I was 1 up, I was 2 up, I was 3 up. All right, so now I know that they're playing match play. So that leads me down the right path when I'm making my interpretation and my decision. The next thing we talk about is is it a singles match? Did you have a partner? So is this a team game? Is this an individual match? And whose ball was involved? Your ball, a partner's ball, some other ball? So listen first and ask the right questions. But I promise you, that very first question, are we playing match play or stroke play, is vital, because as happens, it seems like at Bel Air about twice a month, somebody comes in and they were playing match play and they said, well, we didn't know what to do, so we played 2 balls. Well, if you're about halfway down your rules journey, one might know that in match play, playing 2 balls is not permitted. So right there, that leads us directly to our answer. So again, asking the right questions. And the other thing we always want to ask, did anybody else see what happened? Another player, a spectator, if it's an event of any size or consequence? Did a caddy see anything? Because the player is responsible for the knowledge that's available to them. So when you come into a rule situation, don't be afraid to ask. Anybody see what happened? Did that ball bounce, or did it embed on its own? You've got gallery there. You've got people there. Balls get hit into spectators. Did anybody pick up this ball? Did anybody see what happened once this ball hit? So we can't be afraid to ask questions and ask people that are around. And one of the things I always like to say is, please never guess. Never guess. If you are not 100% sure, know how to get an answer. It's okay. I promise you it's okay. It is far better to say, I'm not sure. There have been plenty of times I've had to say, you know what? I'm just not sure. That's a great question. I've got to get back to you, because when you guess and when you're pretty sure and you start to give out that information, and it's like the old telephone drill when we were kids. I mean, that's how bad information about the rules just grows and grows when somebody makes a guess. And we get those questions in the golf shop. Hey, pro, I was playing in a tournament, and the pro there told me that you know, I could ground my club in a bunker, and that's what I've been doing because I heard that was right. Well, no, you can't do that, and you end up having to backtrack. So just, you know, as a very important footnote, remember, if you're not sure, get an answer. And I'll tell you what, people, I'm happy to take those calls. I get calls, not every day, but I get plenty of calls. I know the guys, the staff at the section at the SCGA, they get plenty of calls. The USGA gets calls. I mean, we have the resources here to get questions answered, and there are a lot of excellent rules people out there. So
I have a question. I have a question here, Dave, if I can interject for a moment. When
please.
Obviously for you and your membership, you have the utmost member trust that a pro can have. So many times when a member comes in and has a rules question for you and you answer and you know the rule, they don't challenge that and ask for you to interpret the rule in the book or to show them the rule in the book, because you have that member trust with them and they definitely take your word for it. What kind of advice would you give a young associate that's relatively new at a club who's put in that situation where they're asked a difficult rules question? They know the answer, they give the answer, but they don't have that member trust with the member. Can you talk a little bit about the dynamic of knowing the rules and also knowing how to show the rule in the book and interpret the rule for the member as a matter of fact or proof?
John, that's a great question. And certainly, I appreciate the vote of confidence. And we certainly didn't start at that level. Absolutely not. And trust in the rules is earned. It's not implied. And as a young associate, as a young apprentice, when you're confronted with those situations, the rule book is your friend. And one of the things we always say, it's pretty neat to show them that rule. Hopefully you've got enough understanding of the rules that you can go to the rule and show them under Rule 17 their options in a penalty area. You can show them in Rule 9 what happens when your ball at rest is moved. But my suggestion would be, and it's kind of fun, everybody should certainly have a rule book at their disposal. And if you're on this journey, it's kind of fun when that question comes in. The minute you start to hear the facts come out of the situation, you want to formulate in your mind, where am I going with this? Is what rule, where in the book does this fit? And the index is a great tool. One of the things I always did in the front end of my career is I tried, I mean, there's 25 now, by memorizing the rules and the rule number. For instance, Rule 17, penalty areas. If somebody came in with a question about a ball that went in the water, I knew, because like I said, it's only 25 of them, I knew I was going to go to Rule 17. So I already looked pretty good in their eyes. Even though I didn't know what the answer was, I at least knew that water, that penalty areas was Rule 17. So that golfer walks in the shop, you begin to gain that trust, and you have a little fun with them. You say, let's see, we've got a ball in the water. Let's pull out our book and see what Rule 17 has to say about our options when that ball is in the water. So again, that's how you start to gain that credibility. And it's kind of funny, just as a footnote as it relates to this, one of the things we always joke about, you've almost never seen an official on TV fumbling through a book, because we've got a saying on the tour and at the highest level, if you need a book, you need a radio. So if we need a book, you won't see anybody in a Ryder Cup match or at the Masters fumbling through their rule book out there on hole 13. If you don't know it that well, you are on the radio asking for help, and we all do it. So my suggestion to your question, John, which is a good one, if you really learn the rules numbers and start to learn where in the book that stuff is, when those facts and those questions are coming out, you're already formulating in your mind where in the book you're going. And the players get reasonably impressed when you can pull that book out and show them in Rule 17, look right here, this is what it says. Great question. Any other questions out there about these kinds of things? All right, let's see. Not sure. Let's see what else we have. Oh, great. Certainly. One of the things that was my understanding that is required to move through these levels is we have to put together a video presentation of handling a ruling situation. And I think that's a great idea. My understanding, they need to be at least 30 seconds long and no more than a couple of minutes, which is perfect timing, because when you have a ruling, that's what you're trying to do, not back up the golf course. You're trying to get in, you're trying to get out. So my suggestions for making that video, and when I do rules clinics at clubs, which I end up doing, or for different groups of golfers, one of the things I always key in on that I think is important and a wonderful, wonderful topics for these videos is things that happen in every round of golf, things that happen at every course, almost every time you play. Rule 19, the unplayable ball rule. Very easy to create a short video about that. You almost can't play golf these days without dealing with Rule 16, abnormal course conditions, talking about making a video, taking a player off a cart path or a sprinkler head. Gives you a great opportunity to use that nearest point of complete relief idea that nobody seems to understand very well. That's a great, great topic for a video. And then Rule 18, stroke and distance. You know, that option is available to us anywhere on the golf course. So stroke and distance is another great topic to make a short video on. So that would be my suggestion for making those videos. Very easy. Read the rule, put that ball in that situation and practice, because we practice in moving out when we're administering tournaments, moving expeditiously through these rulings, always approaching them. How can I help you? My ball's on the cart path. All right, let's determine your nearest point of complete relief. I believe it's right here. You get 1 club length from that point. Take out your driver. Let's measure that club length. Let's drop it at knee height, and off we go. And we don't slow up play. We move right through that ruling and keep playing golf. So those would be just a few suggestions about where you might be able to make a nice video to use in your presentations, and I think you'll be in great shape. Next, and that's really, gentlemen, what I had put together. I'd love to answer some questions. Somebody must have something they'd like to talk about, or I've got one other great little tidbit here we can have some fun with.
Thank you very much, Dave. Tom's son, not to put you on the spot, did you have anything that you'd like to ask Dave before we get into Dave's little tidbit there, or just a little insight on your part on Dave's presentation? Again, sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay, John. Thank you for again moderating. But Dave, I could feel in your voice the passion you have about rules, and it's kind of cool to hear it, because I haven't met too many people, to be honest, who are so passionate about rules like you. And it's great I learned a lot tonight, to be honest with you, to be on this call, and all the presentation, the highlights, the advice that you gave on the rules as a PGA professional, and to be one of the 3 things, as you mentioned. One is to be a player, one is to be an instructor, and third is to be an administrator. And to be an administrator, I think rules is a big part of it. And I appreciate you taking the time tonight. And I learned a lot from you tonight. So thank you. And hopefully the rest of the audience, not only tonight, but also those who will be listening on the recording, will also be learning a lot from you as well. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I do enjoy it. I am passionate about it, and it's fun. It's nice to be able to help people. It's nice to be able to be involved with the game at the highest level. Sometimes it's a thankless job, as Steve and some of the other guys know, being an official. We end up wearing the black hats an awful lot, and we're the bad guys an awful lot. But we head to these events. We try to call balls and strikes, and that's what officials do. We call balls and strikes as we see them. We all have made mistakes, and one of the things we also say is, if you haven't made a mistake and given a bad ruling, you just haven't given very many rulings. A couple other final little thoughts for sure. One of the things we always encourage people that want to get better at the rules is get involved with officiating in junior golf tournaments. I'll give you a perfect example. When we officiate at a PGA championship or at a major championship, there are days, literally days, where I or we are on the golf course for 10, 12, 14 hours and never make a single ruling. Never make a single ruling. These are experienced players. The golf courses are well marked. People know what they're doing. And you can sit under a tree on the 3rd hole at Bethpage and sit there all day. Like I said, the 95% boredom. But if you want to get good and you want to be better at the rules, raise your hand and go volunteer at a high school tournament or at a local junior tournament. You'll make more rulings in one day at a junior tournament than you will make in a lifetime of working major championships. And they'll be good ones. These young players do things, they're trying to do the right thing. And if you want to cut your teeth and test your mettle and really get good, you will gain more experience officiating at junior golf events, because you will untangle some spider webs that are bigger and deeper than you ever thought could be. And so I really, really encourage, especially our associates and those on the front end of their PGA careers, go out there and help the section out and get involved in these junior events, and you'll see how good you are in a real hurry. And however good you are or aren't, you will get better. Couple of last little things. You know, we were talking about definitions earlier. One of the things I always like to do when I'm teaching a rules workshop, I got a couple of little things in my hand, and we talk about how important definitions are. I've got a twig. I've got a pop top from a beverage can. Now, when we talk about how important the definitions are, think about these two lightweight, little, tiny items. One of these is the movable obstruction, and one of these is a loose impediment. Now you say, so what? Well, what's the big difference? Well, as an example, talking about the importance of definitions, if we had a ball in the bunker and we moved one of these and our ball moved, we could put it back without penalty. If we moved the other one of these and our ball moved, we would put it back with a penalty. So again, two small items, you could flick either one of these away with your finger, but they are treated very, very differently under the rules. And again, it just goes to point out how important understanding those definitions are. Last little final thought, something very recent. We have rule situations come up in major championships, and the talking heads, and people like to talk about them. And just this past week at Augusta, I think if anybody was watching, there was a situation involving Brooks Koepka, Gary Woodland, and their caddies. Anybody remember that situation come up? And there was a question on. Remember that, Tom?
Yeah, I remember. Yes.
Well, there was a question as to whether or not Brooks Koepka's caddy had given advice to Gary Woodland's caddy following a shot. It was either 13 or 15. I think it was 13.
It was 13.
And there was 13, right?
Yeah.
And there was some discussion as to whether or not he had violated Rule 10, the rule on advice. And going back to one of the principles I talked about earlier, when they finished, they interviewed the players and the caddies. And remember what we said about the rules, trust the player. So they asked those players if they were, it was my understanding, as I had heard, they asked those players, were you giving advice? The answer was no, we did not. And as we all know, there was no penalty assessed there. So that was a great example of, something that we don't know what was said. We don't know what they were doing. I certainly wasn't involved and wasn't there, but, I saw something that made my eyebrows kind of go sideways. And as the information started to come out, it's my understanding the players were talked to, and no penalty was issued because the player said no advice was given. So just a great example of how the rules trust the players. The game's played with integrity, and it's one of the beauties of our wonderful game. Anybody else have anything? Any other comments?
So Dave, on the case point that you just made, but if you have evidence on video saying Koepka's caddy, well, that was a 5-iron, whatever, 230 yards. If you hear it, then the rules officials have evidence to overturn what the interview or what the caddy said at the end after the round, and they can make a decision based upon that. Yes or no?
That's true. That's absolutely true. But again, not being there, and I am never one to second guess the guys making the rulings, but they did have that video evidence. I mean, we all saw it. It's been played numerous times over and over again. But after reviewing what they saw and what the players said, had they felt it was a penalty, they would have issued one. But between what they saw and what they were told, they made what they believe, and I am on their side, was the right ruling at the time. And those situations are never easy.
So I guess you mentioned the 95%, as well as the base is trust the player and those involved. But what if you know in your gut that the parties involved are not telling the truth? You know that you just have there's no evidence per se, but there's evidence that you just have a feeling like these guys are not or gals are not being honest. How do you what do you do?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. And at the end of the day, again, as I said, the rules trust the players, but if you don't believe that to be true, the committee has the ability to issue that penalty.
Okay.
I mean, I've been in rules, I have been in rule situations where I saw something happen as sure as we're all talking here. And I asked the player, I said, did this happen? The player looked at me and said, no, it did not. And I know in my gut that it did. I mean, I know what I saw, and I issued no penalty. Because the player told me he didn't do it. I think he did. I thought I saw him do it, but the rules trust the player. So again, that's where you have to be comfortable. And I always think that if there's any uncertainty at all because of this underlying principle, ties always go to the player. The player said, the other player said, two players will come in to the golf shop arguing about a rule. Whose ball is it? If it's, one player saying one thing and another player saying the other, there's no other evidence to support either position. The player whose ball was involved, if he said the ball didn't move, then that's where I'm going, because the ties go to the player. It's a game of integrity. And until we are sure otherwise, that's how we adjudicate those situations. And I'm very comfortable doing that. I think trusting the player.
Okay,
but
thank you.
Not always easy.
That's helpful.
What we try not to do is we're not out there looking to catch cheaters, if you will. I mean, that's not what officials are doing. Officials are there to help players and help the game and be of service. And we're not the guys sneaking around from behind the tree saying, "I got you." That's not what we're doing. We're there, and we always approach these situations with, "Hi, how can I help you? What have we got going here?" And I'm going to trust what they tell me.
Okay.
Well, John, I think we got some pretty good stuff.
Yes, indeed, absolutely. And for all the associates that are viewing this LaunchPad rules session on the website through the education dropdown, we hope you enjoyed it and it proved to be a valuable resource for you. Of course, as Mr. Podas alluded to during the presentation, feel free to reach out to any one of us on this call. We are here to support the associates and their journey towards PGA membership. And thank you everybody for joining the LaunchPad on behalf of the Education Committee. Thank you everybody. Dave, thank you very much. We know you're a busy man, and for you to carve out a little time in the evening like this to do this is not easy, and we are grateful for you doing that with us. Steve Monday, thank you very much for tying this whole thing together. And Tom, thank you, sir. Thanks for being on tonight. Lance, thanks for supporting the Catalyst. You're on every week, and we appreciate that. Feel free to keep in touch with us. Reach out to us, any questions you may have. We'll see you all next week, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right,
Sorry I was late.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
Hey,
Bye.
Mikey.
Yeah,
Looks
I'm
good,
still at work.
buddy. Take care, everybody.
Okay, good night.